Hello, very beautiful community. I'm going to give a reaction to the King's speech or the King's speeches on his US visit. A slightly different arrangement today, beautiful community, because I've got an external virus on top of my ME and long COVID microvascular damage. So I'm trying to keep winning with my breathing. So I think when we talk about the UK royal family, it's important to put one's sensibilities down on the table. I think that helps. And I have split sensibilities here, or rather a sensibility that is at odds with my policy, a little like I have on immigration. That's to say, on immigration, I am much more instinctively welcoming of a very generous immigration policy than I am welcoming of it for pragmatic political reasons. The same with the royal family. I'm pragmatically quite a strong royalist. Very strong royalist, beautiful community. In terms of my private sensibility, the royal family doesn't exist for me. I mean, it exists, and I have nothing against them, but I have no interest in them. You know, King Charles had a beautiful cup of tea is as interesting a thought to me as Ricky 888434 from our comments having a beautiful cup of tea. It's just a person. Now, I do think I did follow one drama the royals had recently, and that was the Meghan Markle Harry versus the rest of them drama, and I have views about that. I also have views on what kind of personality and political figure the late Queen was. But I don't have that kind of inherent interest in the royal family that a lot of Brits have. My partner, who is a journalist, has a bit more of an inherent interest in the royal family, you know? I don't. But politically, I am a royalist, with one exception. I could think it a good idea to abolish the monarchy if that were part of what I increasingly talk about as an important sort of North Star of halting democratic decline. And that's a very serious multi-dimensional national project of political renewal, right? But the problem is that there is no chance that anybody in the UK is going to offer it. And given that, I remain a very strong royalist. Why? Because we're losing institutions which sustain trust across polarized lines. And the royal family in the UK is such an institution. Right. You can have folks in the UK who can get, moved by something to do with the royal family from all kinds of different socioeconomic, political, ideological, cultural backgrounds. And that's why it's in fact a very important dimension of buoyancy that the royal family gives to the UK democracy. That's why I'm a very strong royalist. Even though I could imagine taking an anti-monarchy position, but it would have to be part of a very special political project that made that particular reform go with many, many other reforms and form a single project that a government that was really proactive with a real clarity of vision was implementing. That's nearly impossible. And so therefore practically I'm going to remain a strong royalist. So that's me and the royal family, beautiful community. Now, how did my king do in America? Close to 10 out of 10. Close to 10 out of 10. Now, there was one person in the world who hated the king's performance more than anybody else, and that's J.D. Vance. Because J.D. Vance understood that the king's speech to Congress was essentially an evisceration of Trump, a very quiet one, a very British one, but one that was, detectable to people who are properly attuned. Now, the king hit Ukraine, NATO, the US-UK relationship historically, the climate crisis, democracy, the protection of counter-majoritarian institutions. There was quite an anti-Trump speech, but Trump didn't get that, and Melania wouldn't have got that. J.D. Vance got that, and so he hated it. So it was beautifully judged. It had a lot of humor. The speech is, to a good degree, authored by the king, but it's also collective enterprise writing it. It's fantastically done, and actually challenged the Trump administration more than the UK government has managed to. But did it tastefully, and did it, if you like, so delicately that Trump didn't notice, even though the points that were made were actually very bold. And you had a situation where people who absolutely would not normally applaud something that implies a concern for the climate crisis, applauding because it was sufficiently general and coming from the king. Now, Anthony Scaramucci said something good about the speech. He said if he felt as an American, this was the British royal defending the American century, and then implying that Trump is vandalizing it. And doing so with the kind of delicateness that Trump, with all of his narcissistic predilection to love being associated with the king, was always likely to not hear properly. Then, at a state dinner, the king presented Trump with a bell, a golden bell, from HMS Trump, a submarine that entered service during the Second World War. And Trump absolutely loved it. As soon as the king said, by the way, speaking of submarines, there was this submarine, guess what it was called? It was called Trump, and Trump suddenly began to look around the room, suddenly began to look at the king, began to wonder what was sort of hidden there on the table next to King, which was the bell, and then the bell got revealed, and Trump got so excited, completely caught in the moment. Oh my God, a bell, a golden bell with my name. 60% of the UK population, though this was not the intention, are also seeing that this can be interpreted as a piss take out of Trump. But that's not what the folks planning this intended. But nevertheless, people sitting around in the UK laughing at the fact that we got to give Trump a bell, and he didn't see the funny side of it, because quite frankly, in the UK context, you get a golden bell, you're a bellend, a silly person. Now, so what are the consequences of this? The consequences are as follows. Even though the king did virtually 10 out of 10, it's going to make no difference to the way Trump conducts himself. It's just going to sort of pacify him for a matter of days, and then he's going to revert to where he was before. Trump doesn't evolve. You can't migrate him onto a more pro-UK path. He starts each day anew, and what is permanent for him are certain very, very basic dispositions, very basic ways of going on, a few beliefs. That doesn't change. But as for the rest of it, he just wakes up afresh every day and starts another day, another life, in which the task is to seek narcissistic supply, and that's it. So he's not going to evolve. So from that point of view, does this help the UK? No. Now, it was, however, beneficial because of how public the speech was, right? Because anybody who is a little bit on the fence about how badly Trump is vandalizing the good parts of America domestically and in foreign policy terms, they're going to be a little bit emotional about it being put so powerfully with a sense of history as the king did. Again, anybody watching across the globe would be moved if they're concerned about the state of democracy by an affirmation of the values that lie behind our commitment to counter-majoritarian institutions, right? And our commitment to the history that generated them. You know, it's a remarkable human achievement. That's a very freaky human achievement that we've got, liberal democracy, right? And I don't mean anything ideologically rich by that. All I mean is that you can elect your representatives and you can kick them out of office, just about, and you've got some institutions that operate as checks upon one another. That's really it. But that's quite an extraordinary and quite a freakish human achievement, one of the greatest human achievements of all time, and the speech was imbued with that wonderful sense of, the historical magic of this thing we've got that we're currently losing and that we're currently is getting vandalized by people we elect. So from that point of view, it was an important, if you like, global pro-democratic message. The speech resonated, it was powerful, and it's going to move some people. But it won't affect Trump. Now, the other big picture thing is that in a certain way, there wasn't any special strategy behind the deployment of the king in this way. In other words, major European countries, including the UK, don't have a strategy for how to deal with the United States. Not only do they not have a strategy, but they don't have the semblance of developing one. And when they talk about developing one, all too often that talk is not properly connected to actually developing one, but it's just connected to the impression of giving the impression of one being developed. And yet worse, the European powers are not able to cohere, organize themselves together and present a joint strategic front against the threat, against the challenge that the United States poses. A very difficult challenge. The United States is not as bad as Russia or China. It's marvelous in many ways, but it's inside our homes. And this is going to be the topic, whenever health allows, of the next main channel video. It's a very insidious ex-ally that sits inside your systems, and therefore it's useless to say, well, China and Russia are worse, because if you like, the lesser criminal inside your house is a greater threat than a more dangerous criminal outside the locked gate. So what are we doing about this? How are we decoupling? How are we decoupling militarily? How are we decoupling economically? How are we decoupling on the AI front? What's our 10, 15-year plan? We don't have one. So behind the excellent performance by the king, the strategy of the of the UK government is, let's not think about this too much. Let's hope things sort of settle down and pass, and we just get through and get through and get through and get through, and that's it. And so what is being evaded here is not so much the awfulness of Trump, but the reality of history. Right? The UK government is in denial of the historical moment in which it finds itself. And it's only if you're in that kind of denial that you can act as though Trump is a kind of aberration that you can just sit out. We're just going to sit it out. Okay, we've done another week. We're going to do one more. Okay, and a few more. And then a few more, and then it's over. But the drift of the United States is, in various ways, much more volatile and much more destructive than it would be without Trump. But it's not fundamentally directionally different. Because there are larger historical forces operating here. There's going to be no reset to normalcy. What happened to me there? Normalcy. There's going to be no reset to normalcy after Trump. And still, UK behavior is predicated as though that will happen. So the king hit it out of the park, but his performance was not in the service of a strategy. It was more in the service of just batting away the pressure that's got built up on the UK as its dynamic with the United States has deteriorated. Let's 11 talk very soon.